Margaret Thatcher said at the Scottish Conservative Conference in 1988, "I'm sometimes told that the Scots don't like Thatcherism. Well, I find that hard to believe, because the Scots invented Thatcherism long before I was thought of." Tracing the roots of her political beliefs to the works of Smith, Ferguson, and Hume, she laid out a view of a world in which wealth would be generated and spread ever more widely, and wise government stood by to harness the efforts of individuals to improve the well-being of the whole community. On the other side of the political divide, the former British Prime Minister Gordon Brown went one better, often associating himself personally with Smith through the accident of their shared birthplace in Kirkcaldy, Fife. As Chancellor of the Exchequer, he invited Alan Greenspan, then the chairman of the US Federal Reserve and later one of his economic advisers, to give the Adam Smith Lecture in Kirkcaldy in 2005, and was rewarded when Greenspan pondered in his speech to what extent the Chancellor's renowned economic and financial skills are the result of exposure to the subliminal, intellect-enhancing emanations of this area. In giving the Hugo Young Memorial Lecture later that year, Brown declared that, coming from Kirkcaldy as Adam Smith did, I have come to understand that his wealth of nations was underpinned by his theory of moral sentiments, his invisible hand dependent upon the existence of a helping hand. As such examples illustrate, Smith is so intellectually fertile, so multifaceted, and so quotable that he offers constant temptations to overinterpretation or outright misappropriation. Indeed, if context is stretched to breaking point, he can be read as anticipating an astonishing range of contemporary events. One such is the rise of celebrity politics, from the interaction of modern technology with the human disposition to admire the rich and the powerful, and the human capacity for mutual sympathy, both ideas which Smith discusses in the theory of moral sentiments. Another is the logic or otherwise of Britain's departure from the European Union. After all, Smith argued in relation to the American colonies that Britain faced a clear choice, either to separate entirely from them or to form an imperial union, in which case sovereignty, and in due course the seat of government itself, would end up slowly being transferred to America. And so forth and so on. The result has been to create a caricature known as Adam Smith, around whom there is now a vast mythology. These myths tell us little or nothing about Smith himself, but quite a lot about our own changing concerns. And we can see the same patterns in longer-run interpretations. Thus, the effect of seeing Smith through 19th and 20th century preoccupations with free trade, and through the recent growth of economics itself as a professional and specifically mathematical discipline, has been to highlight the economic Smith, the Smith of the wealth of nations. This has served to sideline what might be called the political Smith, the Smith who examines how power, property, and government co-evolve, and the nature and impact of commercial society, both in The Wealth of Nations and in his unpublished lectures on jurisprudence, and the moral Smith, who advances in the theory of moral sentiments a startlingly modern account of how moral and social norms are created and sustained by human communities. Part of the point of this book has been to recover these and still other sides to Smith and integrate them into a fuller picture. That is, to give an introduction not merely to Smith's economics, but to his vastly wider intellectual project. The fad for selective interpretation has even, perhaps especially, included economists themselves. In the words of the Chicago School economist Jacob Viner on The Wealth of Nations, traces of every conceivable sort of doctrine are to be found in that most Catholic book, and an economist must have peculiar theories indeed who cannot quote from The Wealth of Nations to support his special purposes. So it has proven. One example of this tendency will suffice, and from Viner's most famous student, no less. In a famous article of 1977 for Challenge magazine, Milton Friedman, fresh from winning a Nobel Prize in the previous year, undertook to spell out Adam Smith's relevance for today. For Friedman, Smith was a radical and revolutionary in his own time, just as Friedman was in his. Smith was a man who believed his own society was overgoverned, and accordingly set himself against state interventions, just as Friedman did in his own time. Smith's doctrine of the invisible hand reflected his view that human sympathy was unreliable, limited, and needed to be economized, while free markets generated human well-being.